Tesh, author of Relentless, Unleashing a Life of Purpose, Grit, and Faith. I highly recommend. It is a great read. John, great to see you. Everybody's a little, paralyzed, pent up right now with worry, financial worries, and health worries about catching this. How are you dealing with it?
Yeah, we've gone crazy. I mean, we have the same thing you have. We have a responsibility for 11 million listeners a week on our radio shows and also on our Facebook page, which has another 18 million people who are asking for inspiration, and so we've actually gotten together as a family. So my wife Connie and I and Gib and my daughter Prima is she's a fitness instructor. So we started the quarantine workout. So we do that live on Facebook. Yeah, we do that on Facebook 3 days a week. And we realized that all of our viewers on Facebook and also our listeners, they want to know the three things, right? That's what our Intelligence for Your Life thing is all about, is give me the three things. And so what we concentrate on more than anything is something that I learned when I was given 18 months to 2 years to live, as you know, as a terminal cancer patient 5 years ago. And that is, you got to renew your mind. It's in the Bible. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Pick up the sword of the Spirit, And for the first 3 days that this was happening, I was like a Sheltie dog. I was running in circles, trying to figure out what to do. But when you work a process, and I talk about this in the book, about finding a process, and even Admiral Gerald McRaven, who trained the Navy SEALs, said, if you want to change the world, you start off by making your bed. You got to find one thing, find a win in the morning, right? And then even do stuff like, I'm in my basement right now, and I put on a suit and tie because I want to act like I'm going to work. But it's act as if, same for you, right? It's act as if, but it's also, you got to get the rumination out of your brain. And the only way to do that for us, we learned to speak to the cancer, right? And so we speak Psalm 91 over ourselves and over our house. No plague shall come nigh our dwelling. In Isaiah 54, no weapon formed against us shall prosper. Yes, we're 6 feet apart when we do it. Yes, we wash our hands, but also we're renewing our mind. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, when fears of that virus come in, we just cast them right out.
Yeah, meditation, prayer, exercise, routine, right, is one of the big messages.
Yeah, routine is a huge, and it's almost like, the Etch-a-Sketch moment. The kid, we drew this great picture, and then a kid came along and shook it, and we got to start writing it again. And that's where we are right now, and we got to draw a great picture for ourselves.
John Tesh, always good to talk to you, sir. Be well, and thanks for your message tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
So that is the story of Thursday, March 26th, 2020. But as always, the story continues. It continues every single day, folks. And we will see you back here tomorrow night at 7. Be well. Take care. Tucker Carlson is coming up next.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. At this hour, our country has now more confirmed cases of coronavirus than any nation on Earth, more than Italy, more than China, at least by the official count, assuming you believe it. Over 1,000 Americans have died so far. Thousands more tonight languish in hospital beds on the brink of death. Coronavirus has been reported in all 50 states, but the epicenter of this country's epidemic is in our largest city, New York. 1 out of every 4 cases nationally has been reported within the 5 boroughs. Tonight, the streets of New York are all but deserted in parts. A city of 8 million is locked away. Public spaces are eerily quiet. But not the hospitals. Beyond the teeming waiting room, scenes of drama and tragedy play out within. A doctor at Elmhurst Hospital in Queens describes a wave of infected patients overwhelming the facility.
All the patients in this room, all the feet that you see, they all have COVID.
The frustrating thing about all of this is it really just feels like it's too little too late. Like we knew it was coming.
Today is kind of getting worse and worse. We had to get a refrigerated truck to store the bodies of patients who are dying. We are right now scrambling to try to get a few additional ventilators or even CPAP machines. If we could get CPAP machines, we could free up ventilators for patients who need them.
Five ventilators. Oh my God.
Sky News asked another physician, a longtime veteran of medicine in the city, now working at Mount Sinai Hospital in Astoria, Queens, to describe what is happening right now. He didn't liken it to 9/11. He said it was worse.
Hell. Biblical. I kid you not. People come in, they get intubated, they die, the cycle repeats.
You overwhelmed?
Yeah, the system's overwhelmed all over the place. 9/11 was nothing compared to this. We were open waiting for patients to come who never came. Okay? Now, they just keep coming.
That's the situation as of now in parts of New York City. We've been getting anecdotal reports from around New York for the past 24 hours. So to add some hard numbers to that, we're joined by Fox's Rick Leventhal from NYU's Langone Medical Center. Rick, thanks a lot for coming on tonight. Before you give us the overview, I want to run by you something we just heard from a pretty high-level source, generally reliable, that the federal government, this person said, has delivered about 2,000 ventilators, breathing machines, to New York City for this crisis, but all or most of them, this person said, remain in warehouses and not in hospitals. Have you heard anything like this?
Well, I heard from your producer, Tucker, and we're looking into that now. It would be truly unfortunate because these hospitals say they need that equipment and much, much more. This is a truly challenging and potentially dangerous time for all New Yorkers, but particularly for those healthcare workers on the front lines of the coronavirus epidemic, with New York City now accounting for so many of the cases nationwide and the hospitals here being stretched to the limit. The number of cases has now spiked to more than a staggering 37,000 statewide, more than 23,000 of them in New York City, with the death toll nearing 400 and 13 patients dying in one day at the hospital you mentioned, Elmhurst Hospital in Queens, which has set up temporary space outside to accommodate the non-COVID-19 cases. They're moving all of their non-COVID cases out of that hospital so they can focus solely on the outbreak.
Unfortunately, I just think that this is a situation that's going to be going all around, all over. Every hospital will unfortunately begin to see this happen.
So many people are dying here that they parked a refrigerated truck outside the hospital to handle the bodies and built a makeshift morgue outside the ME's office with more trucks and tents. And there are concerns over doctors and nurses having enough personal protective equipment. Those concerns spiked when the New York Post showed pictures of hospital workers at Mount Sinai wearing garbage bags. That hospital today said that, in fact, those workers had the proper equipment underneath those garbage bags. But, Tucker, it's another example of how they're being forced to stretch their protective gear for longer than they're supposed to, wearing bags over the top of it to try and ride this thing out.
Rick Leventhal for us in New York City. Thanks so much for that. So something's happening in New York. It's bad. We're trying to get our arms around exactly what it is, what it means, why it's happening. We're joined now by Fox medical contributor Dr. Mark Siegel. Doctor, thanks so much for coming on tonight. Let me just ask you a form of hypothetical question. Would you be shocked to learn that the federal government has delivered some couple of thousand ventilators, the breathing machines, so desperately in need, and they have not been deployed to hospitals? What would that mean if true?
That would be very disturbing and very shocking. And I happen to know from HHS that they've delivered 4,400 ventilators over the last few days, and they have supposedly delivered or about to deliver hundreds of thousands of N95 respirator masks that are so badly needed. And they need to get into the right hands, Tucker, right away because of what Rick Leventhal was just saying. We have patients in hallways, patients not in the proper unit. All of this needs to be addressed.
How would you assess the situation right now in New York City hospitals?
I think that the hospitals are overwhelmed by not just COVID-19 patients, but by a lot of nervous, worried patients that are flocking to emergency rooms that make triage very, very difficult, makes it very hard to get to the right patients and for the right people to be taking care of them. I think it's very disturbing because I think that the coronavirus patients need to be treated with great respect, but they need to be in the right facilities, which is in negative pressure air places. In terms of the healthcare providers, I want to say this, and this is extremely important. I trained during the height of the HIV epidemic in the 1980s, and I spent the middle of the night many nights, Tucker, drawing blood from IV drug abusers, putting my own health and safety on the line. I joined many other very brave people, doctors and nurses and emergency workers, doing that. But you know what? I did it on my own recognizance. It was my choice. Nobody was compelling me to do it. I do not believe that nurses, physicians, our brothers and sisters on the front lines and EMTs, I do not believe that they should be doing this without proper equipment. I think that they should be properly outfitted. They should not be losing their lives or their health over this. It should be right away addressed immediately.
Well, as you've reported on this show, the rate of infection and the severity of the infection among healthcare workers is disproportionately high. You just think of all those nurses and doctors. Boy, they're taking a risk. Our prayers are with them. Doctor, thank you.
Tucker, in China, it was 1/3 of all patients were healthcare workers. Here, it should be about as close to zero as possible. We need personal protective equipment effective for all of our doctors, nurses, and emergency workers. Thanks, Tucker.
I think everyone agree. Thank you. So you saw what's happening in New York. The question is, why is the outbreak so especially devastating there? New York City is the densest metro area in the country. That's the most obvious answer, probably the biggest problem. The city also has an awful lot of people traveling to and from other infected countries, and that's significant too. But it's not the whole story. As this deadly virus emerged from eastern China and began to spread inexorably across the globe, clearly headed here, leaders in New York not only failed to shield their citizens from it, they took affirmative and aggressive steps to increase the risk to their population. Why would they do that? Well, because they were worried far more about being called racist than protecting human lives. That's not an overstatement. That's not hyperbole. Watch the city's health commissioner, Osiris Barbett, urge New Yorkers to spend as much time as possible in crowded public places. Keep in mind, this video is from February 2nd of this year. That was long after the threat from the Chinese coronavirus was obvious to anyone who was paying attention.
The risk to New Yorkers for coronavirus is low, and that our preparedness as a city is very high. There is no reason not to take the subway, not to take the bus, not to go out to your favorite restaurant, and certainly not to miss the parade next Sunday. I'm going to be there.
Take the subway, go to dinner. People cheer. They feel good about themselves. Future generations, though, are going to watch that video with their jaws open in disbelief. How could someone charged with protecting public health so recklessly endanger it? They'll watch this performance from State Senator John Liu, too. Liu suggested that people who might be concerned in any way about contracting a deadly disease, or who might be interested in where it came from, must be, and you guessed it, bigots.
But there's really no need to panic and to avoid activities that we always do as New Yorkers. We are a hardy people. As an Asian American, I've been somewhat disturbed, if not outright appalled, at some of the comments or gestures that I have seen. Diseases originate from anywhere or from particular places in the world.
In other words, as a member of a protected interest group, I'm ordering you to ignore this threat to your family on moral grounds. Go to the parade or else. That's what Liu is saying. Let's hope that in the wake of this disaster, after John Liu has lost his job and we can all think clearly again, people will stop talking this way in public for good. It was always the most brutal form of social control, masquerading as sensitivity and caring. Now we know it was infecting the public with disease. But at the time, sentiments like this were universal among big city public officials. State Senator Brian Kavanaugh, for example, decided to embark on a crusade against what he called misinformation, a euphemism, as it so often is, for accurate information. Kavanaugh encouraged people to head to Chinatown for a festival.
It's very important that we recognize that this holiday and this festival is of tremendous significance for many communities in our state. And it is very important that we ensure that we don't have misinformation. And many in the media have been covering this issue as if it's, you know, a terrible plague that people have to avoid.
If you don't go to a crowded public place immediately, you're a racist. Look at those people telling you that, demanding that you do that, hectoring you, badgering you, exerting moral blackmail on you to expose yourself. By early March, coronavirus was clearly becoming a major problem in the United States. But for elected officials in New York, the only problem was their constituents' racist worries about staying alive. On March 2nd, this March 2nd, Mayor Bill de Blasio tweeted this, quote, "Since I'm encouraging New Yorkers to go on with your lives, plus get out on the town despite coronavirus, I thought I would offer some suggestions. Here's the first. Through Thursday, go see The Traitor. If The Wire was a true story plus set in Italy, it would be this film." That's right. Go to a movie theater immediately. You must. A week later, de Blasio was still encouraging New Yorkers to live it up and mingle in large groups. On March 11th, which keep in mind was barely 2 weeks ago, de Blasio was still insisting that, quote, "if you're not sick, you should be going about your life." That very same day, the NBA announced it was suspending its whole season. Italy was already several days into a national lockdown. But the mayor of one of the world's most crowded cities was telling everyone to carry on as though the Chinese coronavirus was just a racist myth. Soon after that, people in New York inevitably started to get sick, in some cases very sick, in some cases they died. And then suddenly de Blasio was on Meet the Press shrieking that Donald Trump had abandoned the city. It was their fault, all their fault. That line almost always works, which is why de Blasio did it. The media play along and move on to the next thing, and no one remembers what actually happened. Will that happen this time? Maybe not. This time might be different. This pandemic is too horrible. Too many people are getting hurt. Nobody really liked identity politics anyway. All it did was help mediocrities like Bill de Blasio get elected to office. But it was disgusting and cruel and divisive. And now we know it can get people killed. Maybe we can stop. To respond to everything you've heard so far this hour, we're joined by New York City Councilman Eric Ulrich. Councilman, thanks so much for coming on tonight. So give us first an assessment, if you would, of how you think the New York City public health system is holding up in the face of this.
Well, Tucker, as your previous guest already mentioned, our hospital system is already at capacity. There are more than 23,000 confirmed cases of coronavirus throughout just the 5 boroughs. In Queens alone, more than 7,000 people have confirmed cases of coronavirus. So we really are the epicenter of this pandemic, and I think that it should be cause for alarm for the rest of the country. If it could happen here in New York so quickly, it could happen anywhere.
So the administration has sent, FEMA has sent, thousands of ventilators, breathing machines to New York City to respond to this, and we're getting reports that some of them, or many of them, are still in warehouses. Are you aware of that?
You know, I heard that in the media today and in other places. I was very reassured by the vice president's comments yesterday and President Trump's commitment to the city to make sure that we have the medical equipment that we need. I'm more concerned that we're going to run out of personnel. As more and more doctors and nurses and other first responders get the virus, they are then unable to help their fellow New Yorkers and people who are sick and who need the help. So I think we're going to have a shortage, not of ventilators anytime soon. I think we're going to have a shortage of medical professionals.
What do you, finally, what do you make of the city's health commissioner, the person whose job it is to keep people from getting disease, encouraging people after coronavirus was already here to head to crowded public places?
Obviously, I was disappointed by that. It's very disturbing. The same way I was disappointed in the schools chancellor, Carranza, who urged the mayor not to close our public school system. The mayor dragged his feet. Bill de Blasio did not want to close our public school system, put countless people at risk. We just had a principal last week who succumbed to the virus. So I think a lot of people are concerned about the direction of the city and our response. We were woefully underprepared for this. And clearly, we can't make this mistake in other parts of the country.
I hope not. Councilman Ulrich, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
We just told you what's happening in New York at this hour, the outlines of it anyway, but what's happening in the rest of the country? Chief Breaking News correspondent Trace Gallagher is tracking that for us tonight. Hey, Trace.
Hey, Tucker, although we should note the U.S. has the most cases in the world, we are now 6th when it comes to death toll, which is a bold statement about our healthcare system. Meantime, here's a few snapshots around the country. California has more than 3,000 cases and 78 deaths, but the northern part of the state is getting hit much worse than Southern California. In fact, Bay Area public transportation down more than 93%. Up the West Coast in Washington state, there are 2,600 cases with 133 deaths. And now Governor Jay Inslee is saying implying the stay-at-home order may have to be extended there. And here's an illustration of impact. Nevada has 420 cases and 10 deaths. But longtime Las Vegas residents say they have never seen the Strip this empty. Finally, the administration is working on changes to social distancing based on whether certain counties are low, medium, or high risk. In other words, the administration will soon decide if we maintain, decrease, or relax social distancing. Tucker.
Trace Gallagher for us. Thanks so much for that.
Yep.
Well, the country just saw its worst unemployment surge in history. Will a new congressional aid package be enough to offset some of the damage from that? That's next. But first, some more footage from the empty, windswept streets of America's biggest city. Well, here's a bizarre headline for you. More than 3 million Americans filed for unemployment last week, and the stock market went up today. That actually happened. Why? Melissa Francis hosts After the Bell on Fox Business. She joins us to explain the inexplicable. Melissa, thanks so much for coming up. How did this happen? Why?
That's a challenge. Yeah. Well, think of it this way. So for more than 3 million people, they went into work one day and their bosses said to them, you know what, I have no idea when this is going to be over. And, you know, when it is, I don't know if we're going to be here. So you might as well just go file for unemployment. More than 3 million people. That's devastating. That's a huge number. Remember, just before this, we didn't have enough people to fill all the jobs that were open. So these bosses aren't even worried about that fact. The real question, though, is how much of this damage is permanent? That's what people in the markets are all wondering about. Who's going to reopen when it's all over? And to answer that question, I would point you to the story of Cheesecake Factory today. They said, we're not going to pay rent on any of our restaurants any longer, basically. That's it. We're not going to pay rent. And that's kind of what happens in these sort of big calamities and recessions. It's somebody like the Cheesecake Factory, where before they had some restaurants you would go in and wait 2 hours. Others you go and you could shoot off a cannon. In a crisis like this, they're going to sit back and say, let me reassess my business overall. Let me say, I'm going to shut down some of my businesses. And my point is that when this is all over, the businesses that were weak before this are going to be the ones that are gone. And the ones that were strong will come back. So there will be some permanent unemployment as a result of this. But those were probably the businesses that were struggling anyway and are going to use this as an opportunity to reassess. Now, for the employees, none of this is their fault. And that's why we come in with the unemployment insurance and that enhanced package from the government. Because for those people, they're just out in the street. And, you know, basically they need to pay their rent and buy food until things start up again and they either go back to their job or find a new one.
Interesting. Oh, I hope there aren't too many of those people. Melissa Francis, thanks so much.
Yeah. I hope I answered the question.
You did, and we appreciate it. Good to see you. Well, the United States Senate just passed a $2 trillion corona aid package last night. It's the largest aid package passed by any deliberative body in the history of the world. This new law includes direct cash payments to most American adults, plus a boost to unemployment benefits that could have laid off Americans earning more money than they did while they were working in some cases, which is odd if you think about it. Orrin Cass is Executive Director at American Compass, and he joins us tonight. Orrin, thanks so much for coming on. You're fundamentally a conservative person. Conservatives have traditionally been wary of bills like this. How should we feel about it?
Well, I think this is a pretty good bill, actually. You know, this is such a unique crisis. We actually have the government telling people not to work. So usually conservatives worry a government aid package might discourage work. But in this case, we don't want people working. And so in that situation, it actually makes a lot of sense to try to get them as much support as we can so that we get them almost the same resources they would have if they were working.
That makes sense to me. The one part of this bill that makes me very uncomfortable is the idea that people who do work might be paying people who don't work more money than they would receive if they were working. That seems like a disincentive. That seems to mock work, basically.
Yeah, I think, you know, this is something that some Republican senators raised at the last minute. And basically what the federal government tried to do was say, we can't figure out exactly what's going on in every state. We're just going to do a block payment, $600 a week to everybody. And so there are some cases where that could mean someone's getting more than they would if they weren't working, if they were working. The reality is I don't think that's actually going to make much difference. You'd be pretty crazy in the middle of this crisis if you had a job to try to get your employer to fire you to make a little bit of extra money for a few weeks when you see so many millions of people unemployed and everyone hoping they can get a job.
Right. That seems unlikely. So overall, you think this will be at least part of the way to helping people not go completely beneath the waves in the middle of this disaster?
I think that's right. I think, you know, the amounts make sense. If you think about a family of four, they're going to get a check for about $3,400. So you're talking about 3 months of rent. You're talking about the equivalent of a whole salary for a month, maybe. And that's exactly what a lot of households need facing the uncertainty right now. A third of households said either they've lost a job or someone in their family has seen a pay cut because of this already. And so we have to get through this crisis. And just importantly, we have to be ready to get rid of these policies when the crisis is over. Because when we do want people to go back to work, that's when we have to make sure they have the incentive to go back to work.
It's a really smart point. But at least this is the most straightforward thing I've seen Washington do in a long time. It's not some sort of tax incentive I can't understand. It's a check. I get that. Warren Cass, thank you for explaining that to us tonight. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Keeping society calm, keeping laws in place, civil order, those are critical to getting through the coronavirus disaster. And yet many cities are embracing anarchy instead. That's next after a quick glance at another section of an empty New York City. During a crisis like this, a big crisis like this, stability is the most important thing. Maintaining basic laws, public order, protecting the vulnerable from predators. You need to do these things. That's how you keep people calm and prevent panic, things from spiraling out of control, which they always can. Our leaders ought to know that. It's intuitive. Most people understand it. And yet, for many in power, coronavirus is an excuse to make things more disorderly, to inch closer to anarchy. Cities across the United States are releasing hundreds of prisoners, including violent prisoners. Why are they doing this? Coronavirus. They don't really explain it. They're using this opportunity to do what they've wanted to do for a long time. In cities like Cincinnati and Philadelphia, police are openly stepping back from enforcing even the most basic laws. It's not their choice. They're being pushed by their elected leaders. This leaves regular people at the mercy of criminals. Bill McSwain watches all of this close up. He's U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, and he joins us tonight. Bill, thanks so much for coming on. Tell us what's happening in Philadelphia and how your leaders have used this pretext, this excuse, to make the city more dangerous.
Well, here's the problem that we're dealing with in law enforcement, Tucker. There are essentially two groups of people that are trying to take advantage of this pandemic for their own selfish purposes: criminals and progressive prosecutors. And in many ways, these two groups, I think, are indistinguishable. And I say that because they want the same things. They essentially want a moratorium on any arrests. They essentially want our jails to be emptied. And both of these groups, I think, are a clear threat to public safety.
Does it occur? I mean, this is not really a threat to those of us who are in, good health, armed men, okay? But for vulnerable people in our society, this is a massive threat. Does that occur to, normal people, law-abiding people who can't defend themselves? Does this occur to these prosecutors that they're hurting people?
I don't think it does. I think what occurs to them is that they want to promote their radical ideology, which puts violent criminals on the streets, and they see an opportunity here. We have a district attorney in Philadelphia, Larry Krasner, who is calling for essentially a mass release of criminals up to and including people on death row. And he's trying to create panic out of this situation when currently we have no prisoners in the local Philadelphia jails that have the virus. And I believe there is one prisoner in the state system that has the virus. We all need to take this seriously, but this is not the time to fling open the prison doors.
So what you're saying is there's no actual reason to do this other than we're all distracted so they can.
What we need to do is we need to take an incremental, reasonable, step-by-step approach. And I think that's what we're doing in the federal system. We're watching things very carefully. If we have signs of the virus, people are going to be isolated. Visits to the prison have been cut off. And we can react appropriately if a problem exists. But the Krasners of the world see this as an opportunity to let criminals roam the streets again, because that's part of their ideology.
People are going to get hurt as a result of this. Probably already are. Bill McSwain, thanks so much for the update from your city.
If I could leave you with one thought, Tucker, I want you to know, and I want your viewers to know, that in the federal system, we are on duty. We're going to continue to do our job, virus or no virus.
Amen. That's reassuring to hear. Thank you.
Thank you.
So there are a lot of consequences maybe we haven't thought through of this pandemic, and one of them is countries to our south could be destabilized by it, and you could see a surge, a big surge of illegal immigration come up from Latin America. If that does happen, and it absolutely could happen, are we prepared to deal with it? Mark Morgan is Acting Commissioner of Customs and Border Protection, and he joins us tonight. Mr. Morgan, thanks very much for coming on. This does not seem like a crazy possibility. It's very easy to imagine that a place like Mexico, which doesn't seem to be doing anything to protect the population, is flouting any suggestion that they lock anyone down, that they could have massive problems with this. What would that mean for us?
Well, Tucker, you're spot on. It's not hyperbole to think about that. But what I want your listeners to know, this isn't the first infectious disease crisis, right? SARS, H1N1, and what we do, CBP as well as other governmental agencies, look, we hope for the best, we plan for the worst. And that's exactly what we're doing now. So we know that that could be a possibility. So we're taking aggressive containment and mitigation strategies now to help stem that if that should become a possibility. And the president's authority and his agreement with the CDC order last Friday is doing just that. In 6 days, Tucker, it's amazing what we've accomplished. The overall people trying to enter our country illegally in 6 days because of the CDC's order that the president approved has dropped 50%. And another key stat, if you don't mind, is our vehicular traffic and our pedestrians, actually both at the northern and southern border, has dropped by over 65%. That means the Mexican citizens and the Canadian citizens themselves are actually self-policing and doing as the medical experts say, and they're staying home, and that's because of this president and the CDC's order.
Right. I mean, to be fair, though, those are mostly people who obey the law coming up from Mexico legally every day and from Canada. I wonder, are you seeing a drop in what we've heard for the last 3 years from Democrats, which is it's immoral to keep anybody out, to enforce borders? Borders themselves are immoral because no one's illegal. Are people saying less of that kind of nonsense now that coronavirus is here?
So it's interesting, Tucker, because for a long time we've been saying borders matter. And we were talking about that. We've been talking, hey, drugs are pouring in this country, killing 68,000 people last year. We have bad guys, criminals, gang members pouring in. But we've also been saying that infectious disease coming across the border is a real threat as well. But people are dismissing, and they weren't listening. But they're listening now. It's that really the third part of that stool. And infectious disease, it's important, and it does matter. Secure borders matter.
As we just saw in a segment we did on New York, leaders in some places don't care if you get sick. They're never going to protect you because it makes them feel guilty. Unbelievable. Mark Morgan, great to see you tonight. Thank you.
You bet. Thank you.
So some hospitals across this country are overwhelmed, and some are considering what would once have been unthinkable, refusing to resuscitate patients with coronavirus, no matter what the patient's desire is, no matter what the patient's family thinks. That's happening, and it's next. Plus, most Americans are poorer than they were a month ago, but one hedge fund manager made $2 billion on Monday. How'd he do that? Off your suffering. We've got details just ahead. According to a story in the Washington Post, which we always check, at hospitals across America, officials have discussed implementing hospital-wide do not resuscitate orders for patients with the coronavirus. The orders would override the wishes of sick people and their families in order to protect nurses and doctors while saving resources for other patients. Dr. Jeanette Neshawat is an emergency medicine doctor, and she's now a Fox Medical contributor. We're happy to have her tonight. Doctor, thanks for joining us. First, the obvious question, is this true? And if it is, what does it mean, and what do you think of it as a physician?
Sure, Tucker. Yeah, this is being discussed in several hospitals throughout the country. And Tucker, this is not just an ethical dilemma. This is a matter of physical safety for doctors, for nurses, and healthcare workers. So that's why the question of DNR has come up. DNR means do not resuscitate. That means if someone's heart stops beating or they stop breathing and they have a DNR, they don't want intervention. And from my experiences of running a code, we call it a code, in the emergency room, it's an orchestrated storm. If someone's heart stops beating or they stop breathing, then a bunch of healthcare professionals, doctors and nurses, they rush into the room. We have one person doing chest compression, CPR, another person putting in an IV, another person establishing an airway, another person pushing medications, epinephrine, to try to keep the patient alive. But throughout all of this, the viral particles are scattered, they're aerosolized, and the healthcare workers that are high risk of contamination and becoming sick. And so there's a great concern of doctors and nurses, passing away. We saw 39 doctors in Italy died, and then the whistleblower in China, he died as well. So it's a difficult situation that I hope no doctor or nurse or healthcare provider ever has to face. I think it's a matter of if we can try to prepare in advance and get enough PPEs that we can avoid this universal DNR is what they call it.
Yeah, I mean, one hospital has lost a nurse in Manhattan. I think we have a picture to put on the screen. Just died of coronavirus, fairly young, by the way. Very quickly, doctor, would it, under ideal conditions, would it be possible to protect nurses and doctors from contamination?
Yes, here's the thing, Tucker. When there's a code, sometimes it can happen suddenly. And doctors and nurses, they have to, it takes a couple of minutes to put your PPEs on. Well, those 2 minutes are 2 minutes of lack of oxygen to the patient's brain and their organs. So even if you do get to resuscitating, there could be long-term disability. But fortunately, there's not always a sudden death with COVID patients. They may be intubated and they may be just a steady decline until they pass away, which buys the doctor time to have that, difficult discussion with the family about DNR, do not resuscitate, let them die naturally, that sort of thing.
Man, you all live in a world most of us avoid, a world of real drama and significance, too. So bless you. Thank you, doctor. Good to see you tonight.
Thank you, Tucker. Good to see you, too.
So as we said, and let it sink in, 3.3 million Americans filed unemployment claims last week. That's the highest number ever recorded in this country, in history ever. It's easy to see why a lot of people in America are deeply worried about the state of our economy. And maybe nobody in the country has seemed more panicked about it, at least in public, than billionaire hedge fund manager Bill Ackman. Last Wednesday, and this got a lot of attention, Ackman spent a full 28 minutes on live television yelling about how our country is collapsing. It's over, he said. We're done. Here's part of it.
Hell is coming. This was a feeling like I've never had. Like there's a tsunami coming, right? The tsunami's coming and you feel it in the air, right? The tide starts to roll out, okay? And on the beach, people are playing and having fun like there's nothing going on. And that is the feeling I've had for the last 2 months. Okay, and my colleagues at work, okay, thought I was a lunatic. We need to shut it down now. America will end as we know it, okay, I'm sorry to say so, okay, unless we take this option.
America will end as we know it. That scared the hell out of investors around the world. It was everywhere. You probably remember it. Ackman was especially terrifying, bearish, as they say on Wall Street, on the future of Hilton Hotels, of which he was a shareholder. Quote, "It's going to zero along with every other hotel company in the world. Every hotel is going to be shut down in the country. Every one." Wow. Sounds like Bill Ackman is in serious trouble, along with the rest of America. Well, no, not exactly. In fact, Bill Ackman is suddenly much richer than ever. Just this Monday, Ackman made a net profit of more than $2 billion. He was buying stocks again often at vastly discounted prices. How'd they get so low? One of those stocks was Hilton Hotels, the one he just told America 5 days before could, quote, go to zero. If you've been following Bill Ackman's career, that phrase might sound familiar. Several years ago, Ackman made a massive bet against a nutritional supplements company called Herbalife. Whatever you think of Herbalife, Ackman was hoping to tank the stock price and get rich from that. He shorted it. So he relentlessly talked down the stock in public. At one point, Ackman claimed Herbalife shares could, quote, go to zero. Again, familiar? Now, that ploy failed, but Ackman simply upped the stakes. He did just pretty much the same thing to our entire public markets. Ackman doesn't seem embarrassed by this in the least. Apparently, he plans to keep his new billions. He hasn't announced any plan to donate any of it to the Americans whose lives he just made worse. But that's the kind of person Bill Ackman is. He's an amoral greedhead whose behavior adds nothing worth having to our country and often hurts us. But that's not even the worst part. After all this, Ackman is still considered a sage by his peers and fawned over relentlessly by toadies in the business press. What kind of society thinks that Bill Ackman is a role model? We should ask ourselves that. Thanks to coronavirus, colleges across the country are empty and students are now learning online. Will this be a temporary hiccup, or will it lead to some broader transformation of higher education? And what should you root for? That's next.